In India, it looks like important things happen amidst the forest, trees, underneath trees, and this seems to be happening again. I'm so happy to be here again. The Tibetans, we venerate this country, the spirit of this country, and the wisdom that this country has given to us and guided us for all this time. To be able to share it back to our Indian friends here is such an auspicious, and I take this as an opportunity, as a follower of the Buddha, as an opportunity to accumulate merit and plant the seed of something wholesome and goodness on this earth. As many of you know, we have been going through the classic Indian text written by one of the greatest and most celebrated master, Śāntideva. As Professor Divakar put it very rightfully, this is probably one of the most intensive, beautiful, and systematic mind training that one can encounter. But when we hear the term mind training, it is important to remember that the technique and the wisdom that this teaching offers is not just some simple method to overcome gross emotion, discursive thoughts, and agitation, so on and so forth. But this text really offers us far deeper and much more profound element of mind, essence of the mind, nature of the mind, why it needs to be trained, how it can be trained, and why it is trainable, and ultimately why it does not need to be trained. Such a vast and infinite wisdom and the message that one will find in this text alone tells us some of the unfathomable findings and discovery of these Indian saints and panditas of the past. We should remember the methods that are found here are very much relevant today. It's modern relevant. In fact, it is much more necessary. Of course, the language and some of the analogy, one could say, is outdated, but its content and its ultimate meaning remains the same. As the title indicates, this is the way of the Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva has a connotation of a person, a courageous being. We are talking about basically courage, confidence. In other words, we are talking about warriorship. This is a way to be the way. This is a classic text to text that guides us step by step to be the warrior. Warrior whose aim is to fight the battle of emotion, ignorance, not only for oneself, but fight this battle for all the other beings who are bound by emotion, defilement, and ignorance. When we hear the title, Bodhicharyavatara, Bodhicharyavatara, some may think here is a list of Buddhist ethics and morality or discipline to train our mind. While this is true, it is important to know that this is not complete. It is important to learn the right conduct. It is important to learn the right livelihood, right action. It is important to be non-violent. It is important to be not distracted. It is also important that we cut the root, cut the real cause that binds us or that forces us to this samsaric bondage. But all this alone does not make the way of the Bodhisattva. So what makes the Bodhisattva way so special? One might ask. Bodhisattva's way is special because Bodhisattva must learn, while not dwelling in the samsara, Bodhisattva must also learn never to aspire for enlightenment. And this makes the Bodhisattva path very unique. We hear the accounts of great Bodhisattvas such as Kishthigarva, where his only aspiration is never to be enlightened until all sentient beings are enlightened. So we are talking about a vast, infinite view, vast, therefore, vast, infinite motivation, aspiration, and therefore action. This meager wish to be free from samsara, this meager wish to be free from obvious pain and problems is something that bodhisattvas will not only it's not only a bodhisattva's goal. In fact, it is something that bodhisattva will detest and develop revulsion. This is the quintessence of the bodhisattva path. Not to be in the samsara, but not to also aspire for the nirvana. Why is that so? And why is it important not to fall into the extreme of samsara and also nirvana? Is it a mere abstract, intellectual sort of idea? Or is it something achievable? And this is what is offered by Śāntideva systematically here in this Bodhicharyavatara. As we have been doing in the past, I will be visiting the 9th chapter again and again, and then go back to the rest of the chapters. Because it is in the 9th chapter, Śāntideva will give us the Mahayana, the wisdom of the Mahayana. And this is important because, for instance, it's easy to say, and it is moralistically and politically correct to say that one should not have greed. But when we say one should not have greed, there has to have a base why one should not have a greed. If there is no base, then such kind of instruction does not have it is not a what we call path of bliss. If the path to abandon the greed does not have a base, then such kind of practitioner who abandons the greed can even encounter or even have pride of not having greed. So when the Mahayana people talk about not having greed, They are not merely talking about not having the greed because worldly dharma or the pleasurable objects are temptation, the cause of temptation. They are evil. They bring problems, so on and so forth. But in fact, nature of these samsaric phenomena have no inherently existing or no substantially existing truth. And this, based on this wisdom, the Bodhisattva builds all the mind training, from a very grand mind training such as the Shamatha Vipassana to even the seemingly meager instructions such as how to wash your hands, as it is found in the Bodhicharyavatara. This is why while you hear the rest of the chapter, it is important to really never forget the base of the 9th chapter, which is where you will find the base of wisdom. At the beginning of the 9th chapter, Śāntideva said, that all these bodhisattva skillful means such as generosity, discipline, patience, all these, samadhi, diligence, all these are taught by the Buddha as a support, as a supplementary, as a means to invoke, establish, recognize, actualize the wisdom. If the wisdom is lost, acts such as generosity, discipline such as refraining from harming others, act of patience, act of diligence, and even the act of one-pointedness or samadhi, concentration, is like blind leading other blinds in a desert. This is what the commentary tells us. So the wisdom is so important. I believe that last time we completed the third, 3 chapters. So we will begin with the 4th chapter this time. And probably within these 3 days, for those who wish to, since after all we are discussing Bodhisattva's way of life, we will also try to insert a small ceremony of taking the Bodhisattva vow for those who wishes to take the Bodhisattva vow. So that what you are hearing will become more meaningful, and what you are hearing the instructions on the Bodhisattva path can be applied into day-to-day existence. So I'll begin with again a little bit of 9th chapter, talking about the true truth. We talk about relative truth and ultimate truth. And when we talk about relative truth and ultimate truth, we are doing so as a means and a method to establish our view. In other words, when we talk about ultimate truth and relative truth, we are only doing it within the relative truth. The ultimate truth cannot be expressed and cannot be taught. Now this statement, ultimate truth, cannot be talked about, cannot be expressed. When I say this, it can also create misinterpretation. When I say ultimate cannot be taught, cannot be conceived, we are not talking about some sort of a supernatural bliss. We are not talking about the almighty state or something very because when we talk about inexpressible, unthinkable, many times we tend to think and we tend to label it as unthinkable, inexpressible, so on and so forth. So this is important that we know especially in the Mahayana Buddhism, when we talk about inexpressible, we are not talking about an existence of something that cannot be expressed, such as the existence of God. So we are not talking like that. I'd like to elaborate this a little bit before I go through all the Bodhisattva training method. When Shakyamuni Buddha finally, when he won the battle with Mara under the Bodhi tree, and finally when he achieved enlightenment after countless eons of accumulation of merit, and finally after he achieved enlightenment, the first thing he said was, he said, he has found profound, peaceful, extremeless, luminous, uncompounded, like a nectar. Such truth he has discovered. Yet, no one could hear this, even if I express. Therefore, I shall remain in the forest without speaking. I'm just loosely translating what he said. This was his first statement. Well, putting it in very mundane language, basically he said, I have found a brilliant truth that cannot be understood even if I speak. So therefore, I'll keep quiet. It's believed that at this point, Indra and Brahma and many other disciples have requested him to teach, even though the truth cannot be expressed. And then he agreed and he went to Varanasi, and there he, for the first time, the first ever sermon was given, which we now know as the Four Noble Truths. Now here, this is something I like to also say, since we are doing this Bodhicharyavatara in the sort of university context, I'm going to also approach many times this text academically, so many of you might find it a little bit technical and too much jargon, but you will have to sort of bear this time to time. There's a lot of interpretation here. Let's say Hat Sutra, Prajanapara Siddhya, or let's say Vajracchedika Sutra. Vajracchedika, or nowadays this is really badly referred as Diamond Sutra. If you look at the text, if you read the text, you will notice something. Like for instance, Prajanaparamita Siddhya Sutra, the Hat Sutra, the actual teaching. The sutra is supposedly the teaching of the Buddha, but the actual teaching during whole discussion, such as the Prajanaparamita Siddhya, do you remember what Buddha was doing? He wasn't speaking at all. He was sitting. Well, we actually don't know whether he was even sitting. Out of lack of choice of words, we refer it as a samat nawaniji tinganzina nyambar shukso, which means Buddha dwelled on the samadhi of all illuminating. That's it. Whether he was sitting on a cushion, as we are now made to know. Every time we mention the word meditation, immediately it comes within the context of sitting straight upon a cushion. That's a very limited way of understanding meditation. But anyway, Buddha was in that state of what we call all-illuminating samadhi. Don't ask me what that is. And meanwhile, as a blessing, this is what the Prajanaparamita Siddhya Sutra said, as a blessing of the Buddha, his disciple Shariputra had this curiosity. And out of his curiosity, when he looked at Mahasattva, Bodhisattva, Avalokiteshvara, he could tell that Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva is one of the most busiest beings. He wasn't sitting, he wasn't always, in other words, behaving. You understand? He wasn't always quiet. He was moving around. He was doing all kinds of things. He's manifesting as boy, as a merchant, and as boys, as girl. He's busy. He's doing something all the time. Yet, Shariputra noticed that Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, is never departed or never distracted, never was caught or entangled or occupied by all the mundane entanglement. And therefore the Mahasattva, Bodhisattva, Avalokiteshvara, is always free, yet he is always engaged, interacting with the people. So Shariputra asked the questions, and this is a dialogue between Avalokiteshvara and the Shariputra. Similarly, if you are looking at one of the great Mahayana sutras, such as Vimalakirti Sutra, again, This sutra is actually an account. This is one of the most important Mahayana Sutra. It's an account where once when Buddha was, I think it was in Sankasya, Saravasti, yes, Saravasti. Message, he received a message that Bodhisattva, one of his disciples, I guess, a Bodhisattva for Vimalakirti is sick. And Buddha, out of concern, asked his disciples, go and look to see what's happening with him, how he is. And one by one, the disciples refused to go and see how he was. And everybody had a story to tell. For instance, when Buddha asked Ananda, go and look, go and see how Vimalakirti is. Ananda said, I'm not going. He said, why not? So this, Vimalakirti, once when you, Buddha, when you were not well, I went out to look for water and medicine. And I bumped into this Vimalakirti, and Vimalakirti asked me, what are you doing here? And Ananda told him the reasons, Buddha was not well, and he came for the medicine, etc. And Vimalakirti gave him a big scolding, saying, this is really wrong for you to think that Buddha is sick. Buddha never gets sick. Buddha is beyond sickness, beyond all this cause and condition. How can you even think that Buddha was sick? And Ananda was about to give up, saying, okay, this is my misinterpretation, my impure perception to even think this way. Just as he was about to give up, Vimalakirti said, but you must take medicine. Not for the Buddha, but for you, because you need to accumulate merit. So for you to accumulate merit, I suggest you to take medicine. So on and so forth. Sutra is basically an account of disciples' interreaction. In that sutra again, Shunyata is taught very vividly. I was talking about what Buddha said right after his enlightenment. In fact, the very statement he gave was a teaching. The fact that the truth cannot be taught, the fact that truth cannot be interpreted and, conceptualized, so on and so forth. Because there is no words or language that is adequate enough to express this truth. Not because the truth is holy and supernatural. It's got nothing to do with that. Because the language that we have is too vague. The conceptions, discursive thoughts that we have are too contradictory. As one of the Tibetan commentators said, for instance, when we say blue, color blue, what do we really mean by that? What is real blue? It is arbitrary. It is an imputed perception. It is a compounded phenomena. It is a decision made very vaguely. We have the concept of blue. So with this kind of tool, with this kind of language, with this kind of what do you call it, dualistic, subjective and objective interreaction, it is impossible to understand the truth. Now here is a dilemma, because if the truth cannot be understood, if the truth cannot be taught, if the truth cannot be comprehended, then what is the path forward? Because since the truth cannot be discovered, the path that we are going through is totally pointless. So this is the argument. In order to, okay, what path can do is to unveil the veil that is covering the truth. This alone proves, indicates that the path is faulty. Path is falsifiable. Path is, this is probably a little bit confusing for me if I say this, but to be really strict, to be very straightforward, all path is a deception. And this is a particularly a Madhyamika expression. A path is a deception. But certain deceptions are necessary to to liberate ourselves. So this particular shloka probably might come this year, which I will point out. But anyway, for now, this is what Śāntideva also said. I repeated this last time also. There's a one ignorance that the Buddhists are allowed to have for the time being, which is to believe that there is an enlightenment. With this, you can build a path. That this, I keep on repeating about the truth being inexpressible, unthinkable, and its simplicity. The challenge to understand this truth is not because it is difficult. It's not like a rocket science. In fact, the opposite. It is too simple. And what makes us so? What makes it so difficult for us to understand the truth is the habitual pattern that we have. The strong habitual pattern. We are not only talking about the gross habitual patterns such as drinking and such as, like stealing or, all the gross negative habitual patterns. We are even talking about subtle and seemingly beneficial habitual patterns such as meditation. I'm not rejecting meditation here. Meditation is important. But meditation is only a tool. It is not the means. Someone like Śāntideva will say, our aim is not to be a good meditator. Our aim is to be liberated, including the meditation itself. But habit, continuous, strong habit will always hinder us, and always it is very difficult to understand this truth. So, knowing that there is this habit, we now have to develop a path that speaks the language of the habit. And this is why Buddha gave teachings such as the Four Noble Truths, where he talked about problem, cause of the problem, solution to get rid of that problem, and Nirodha, which is that the problem is solvable, that inherently there is no problem. So, I was going to talk about the two truths. So the two truths, the concepts such as two truths, relative truth and ultimate truth, which will be taught in the 9th chapter very extensively. But I'm going to visit this again and again, is for the sake of establishing the path. Only for the sake of establishing the path, we talk about the two truths. So, okay, so the challenge is first to define what is relative truth and what is ultimate truth. That's already a big challenge. But even bigger challenge is to really know that these two truths are not like a dichotomy, or they are not a separate entity. They are neither one, and this makes it difficult to establish the path. So I know later as we go along, we will have many questions like, and like if everything is shunyata, if everything is emptiness, why the Buddhists still prostrate to statues such as Buddha statues? Why do we chant mantras? Why we offer incense? Why we make offerings of water if everything is a shunyata? If the self does not exist truly, then why Buddhists talk about karma? Who is it that is experiencing the negative or the effect of negative action, since there is no soul or no truly existing self? Here we will have to understand the relationship between relative truth and ultimate truth. Again, even as I say the word relationship between relative truth and ultimate truth, it already sounds as if there is a true truth that needs to have a relation, but this is not the case. I'm trying to summarize everything what we are going to discuss so that we already have a general idea what we will be discussing.